Well, good morning, and welcome to the last Frankly Speaking of 2024. We're broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. I'm so glad that you've joined us this morning because we have a very busy morning in store. We're going to be talking about Trump and Biden, but we do have some New York State issues. Assemblyman Phil Palmisano released a scathing letter about Hochul's signing of the Climate Change Superfund. There's also a piece from the New York Post in regards to that. Also, a little bit later on, I hope we have opportunity. There's an article as well from Senator Tom O'Mara that we're going to get to. So heavy on New York this morning, but also we do have updates on the funeral plans of President Jimmy Carter and some of the things that have unfolded since his passing. So stay tuned for that. But first, let's go to viewer comments because we received a lot of viewer comments after the program, or maybe right towards the end of the program, and I missed it. Here we go. So I'm curious, and this is sarcasm, why we are spending more money in giveaways, UK for instance, when Yellen claims dire economic consequences. Just another way to keep Trump from leading. And there's been a lot of talks about that in the past, kind of starting Trump and some of the decisions Biden made recently in regards to illegal aliens, et cetera, that really puts Trump in a difficult situation. And remember, at one point when we were talking about what was happening in international affairs, Donald Trump Jr. Suggested that Biden was attempting to start World War III to make it impossible for his father to bring peace and prosperity. But we'll continue with this viewer's comment. There's no question that $33+ trillion in debt is more than outrageous and needs to be addressed. But there truly are people that still don't see this for what it is. Yeah, I think there's the mindset that we can continue to spend. Well, for instance, if Kamala Harris could spend over $1.5 billion and still be in debt another $20 million, I mean, she raised $1.5 billion. I've heard up to $2.5, but let's stick with the $1.5 billion. And she was $20 million in debt after that. You think she was going to spend the government's money, your money, the taxpayers' money, I should say, efficiently and effectively? And she spent that in 107 days. Keep that in mind. So yes, I think there's people, and there's one of the things in society now, after all those stimulus checks and money was being thrown around during COVID, that really do believe, really there's no such thing as a national debt. Essentially, that we can continue to spend. It's very socialist mindset. So that is a very good point. Thank you. Comment from a different viewer. Hi, Frank. Good morning. Well, good morning. I was watching reruns of Games of Thrones. And in full disclosure, I never watched Games of Thrones. So I'm gonna take you at your word. Why wouldn't I? Of course I would. And therein it was said that, quote, we need someone we trust, someone who cannot be bought or influenced. I firmly believe that President Trump is such a man. Unlike any of the socialistic Democrats, I just have no respect for those shallow-minded thinkers who would become the downfall of our society, as stated in the Communist Manifesto, by first taking over the media and therefore our country by leaps and bounds. Yes, the media and academia. We can't underestimate academia. I think that's what we're dealing with, and we have been for a couple decades now, really, with the propaganda and the liberalization and socialist mindset on college campuses and starting before college campuses. We talked about that so extensively. But continuing, Blackstone was right when he wrote that, quote, if no one agrees to abide by the laws, then a society cannot exist, or something to that effect. Thank God that President Trump was and is determined to bring our country together again. God bless him and America. Amen. Thank you very much. Like how you ended with amen. I do say, it is interesting, they're trying to suggest he has an enemies list. And when there was, of course, no enemies list, what do? They create this potential for a pardon by Biden, a preemptive pardon for some of the people that they believe he'll go after. But if you look at it, he actually met, and I didn't mean to get on this, but why not? Because I don't think we'd get to it anyway. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, of all people, revealed that she had a great meeting with President-elect Donald Trump yesterday. Now, if you recall, Trump at one time threatened, if you will, to federalize the crime-ridden district on the campaign trail. So to your point, bringing us together, if Bowser, Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, can can state the fact that, quote, today President Trump and I had a great meeting to discuss our shared priorities for the president's second term. That goes to show there's a more unifying message in what Trump is attempting to do. Now, the three-term Democrat mayor indicated that she and Trump agreed on wanting the nation's capital to, quote, be the best, most beautiful city in the world and reflect the strength of the United States. We discussed areas of collaboration between local and federal government, especially around our federal workforce, underutilized federal buildings, parks and green spaces, and infrastructure. Hey, I wonder why there's underutilized federal buildings. Oh, that's right, because there's so many still working from home, which is another, going back to the first comment from the first viewer, going back to that idea when they made that agreement with the union, the Biden administration, to allow these workers, I believe it was with the IRS, right, to continue to work from home. Another kind of way to gum up the works for the incoming president. But I'll continue with what Bowser had to say, Mayor Bowser. I'm optimistic that we will continue to find common ground with the president during his second term, and we look forward to supporting a successful inauguration on January the 20th. Now, this is a far cry from the incoming president's previous remarks about the city, as you know, but I thought that was very interesting. So to your point, the unifying message, and I think it was Trump himself who said that he, at the inauguration, is going to present basically a unified front, a speech on unity, very different than his 2016 inauguration speech, where still very few people would have, we'll say, the guts to do what he did in 2016, which was to essentially tell you all the troubles of the world and who created it. And the people who created the troubles were literally right behind him, watching him give the speech. But a comment from a different viewer after yesterday's program. I think it's time to recall our governor. There must be a way to start the process. Do you know if it's a possible option? Unfortunately, New York is not set up for recall. Unlike 18 other states, and this is a little research I did, unlike 18 other states in the nation, there is no recall system for voters in New York State to remove an elected official. The power to remove, ironically, an elected official rests solely with the governor. So no, I know there's been bills, if you will, put forward to try to change that, but as of last I knew, there is no recall mechanism for a governor in New York State. So sorry to be the bearer of bad news. And this is just, if you watched yesterday morning, this is just in reference to what a viewer, we started the program off again with viewer comments. We had a comment, and it was a really good point. And it was, President Trump keeps pushing this idea of making Canada the 51st state. And one viewer asked, was that because he thinks it's Republican? Will they vote Republican? And I assumed because of Trudeau that no, they were not Republican. That just like here in the United States, the city's controlling the vote. Well, I may have spoke too soon. A poll recently conducted by the Angus Reid Institute has shown that the Liberals have fallen to third place nationally now. The Conservatives, meanwhile, have risen even closer to 50%. According to the poll, 45% of Canadians expressed an intention to vote for Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives, up 2% since the survey was last sent out. And I don't want to get into all this because it's all the politics of Canada. But maybe, viewer, you are onto something, as always, but the viewers are. And maybe that's one of the reasons why Trump keeps jokingly, or maybe not so jokingly, suggesting that it become the 51st state and calling Trudeau Governor Trudeau. Suggesting that Wayne Gretzky be drafted by the people of Canada to run for prime minister and become governor eventually of Canada. Okay, the breaking news yesterday, and I would love to hear your opinion on this. Donald Trump and Elon Musk, really, but Donald Trump first and foremost endorsing Speaker Johnson. I was really encouraged by this. I know there's some people that disagree on this issue and don't know what to think of Speaker Johnson. I would say think of how much support he gave Trump during the election, and going on some of those Sunday talk shows, and just the media does not hide their bias, we'll put it that way, and doing a fantastic job. So we're going to tell you what he had to say, though you're somewhat aware, but we'll run through that. Also, breaking news, and we'll end on this before we go to break because I don't have a lot to dive into with this, but it is very, very troubling as we learn more about it. The U.S. Treasury has said that Chinese hackers have stole documents in what is being described as a major incident. This coming from Reuters. China keeps poking and poking and poking. And we know we've had great conversations about this in the past with people like former Congressman Tom Reed and so many others about the real threat of China. China wants to be the world superpower, and they want to be the superpower along with Russia and Iran and to edge us out. Now, they believe that they've already won that position, but most believe they're not quite there yet, but making moves daily, and they're always on a long-term plan. So we have the Chinese spy balloons. People still wonder about the drones, which mysteriously have dropped from the headlines. But now we learn the Chinese hackers, and this is not the first instance of Chinese hackers infiltrating our systems. We've also heard of land purchases from China's government, et cetera, et cetera. But again, according to Reuters, Chinese state-sponsored hackers breached the United States Treasury Department's computer security guardrails this month and stole documents in what Treasury called a major incident. This was sent to a letter to Congress, to lawmakers, and the letter was, I don't know if you'd say leaked, but it was provided to Reuters on Monday. The hackers compromised third-party cybersecurity service provider Beyond Trust, ironically, that's their name, Beyond Trust, and were able to access unclassified documents, the letter said. According to the letter, hackers, quote, gained access to a key used by the vendor to secure a cloud-based service used to remotely provide technical support for Treasury Department officials and users. With access to the stolen key, the threat actor was able to override the service security, remotely access certain Treasury Department offices, users, worker stations, and access certain unclassified documents maintained by those users. Based on available indicators, the incident has been attributed to a China state-sponsored Advanced Persistent Threat Actor, or an APT. The Treasury Department said it was alerted to the breach by Beyond Trust on December the 8th, and that it worked with the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and the FBI to assess the hack's impact. A spokesman for the Chinese embassy in Washington rejected any responsibility, saying that Beijing firmly opposes the U.S.'s smear attacks against China without any factual basis. So obviously a real serious threat continuing from China. We'll see where that leads with the new incoming president. There was a lot of concern and fear that in the lame duck, what would you want to say, the last few months of the Biden administration, that there could be China making their moves against Taiwan. We hope that that does not happen, but there was a real concern over that. Now we see China hackers stole documents. We even had alleged Chinese agents infiltrating New York State government. So just as a quick update and some breaking news stories. But when we come back, we are going to talk about President Trump endorsing House Speaker Mike Johnson. What are your thoughts on that? Also, because it is the last episode of 2024, I'd love to hear your recap or your thoughts on the year that was and the year coming up in 2025. What are your thoughts on an exciting new year? Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio on the last Frankly Speaking of 2024. Before we get into the Speaker Johnson conversation, I did not want to run out of time on this because this is very, very exciting news, and it's coming from our Congressman, Nick Langworthy. Nick Langworthy has joined the Make America Healthy Again caucus as a founding member. Today, Congressman Nick Langworthy announced, actually yesterday, that he is a founding member of the Make America Healthy Again caucus, a new initiative focused on improving access to affordable, high-quality foods and primary care to help Americans lead healthier, longer lives. The congressman had this to say: healthy food and access to quality medical care are essential for the long-term health of our communities. In Western New York and the Southern Tier, we take pride in the hard work of our farmers and food producers who help put healthy, nutritious food on dinner tables across America. This caucus will not only help ensure every community has better access to health food options, but also affordable quality health care, so families can focus on living well and building strong futures. I'm proud to join the efforts to work with the Trump administration to make health a priority for all Americans. Now, this caucus will address rising rates of chronic disease and obesity by promoting access to preventative care and affordable, high-quality food. It will also work to support underserved and rural communities, ensuring that no family is left behind when it comes to achieving better health outcomes. The caucus is now led by Congressman John Joyce from Pennsylvania and Congressman Lloyd Smucker from Pennsylvania in the House, as well as Senator Roger Marshall from Kansas in the Senate. So congratulations to Congressman Nick Langworthy for joining the Make America Healthy Again caucus as a founding member. Okay, so yesterday, in case you missed it, Donald Trump tweeted out, "We are the party of common sense. A primary reason that we won in a landslide the magnificent and historic presidential election of 2024. All 7 swing states, 312 electoral college votes, and the popular vote by millions of voters, despite large-scale voter fraud taking place in numerous states, including California, where votes are ridiculously still being counted or under review. All won with ease, calm, and professionalism. Republicans are being praised for having run a legendary campaign. Democrats are being exonerated for their effort, having wasted," so here's that number again, $2.5 billion, much of it unaccounted for, with some being used to illegally buy endorsements. $11 million to Beyonce, who never even sang a song, $2 million to Oprah for doing next to nothing, and even $500,000 to Reverend Al, a professional con man and instigator who agreed to interview their star-spangled candidates, Kamala and Joe. We ran a flawless campaign, having spent far less with lots of money left over. They ran a very expensive sinking ship, embracing DOJ and FBI weaponization against their political opponent, me. But it didn't work. It was a disaster. Let's not blow this great opportunity which we have been given. The American people need immediate relief from all of the destructive policies of the last administration. Speaker Mike Johnson is a good, hardworking, religious man. He will do the right thing, and we will continue to win. Mike has my complete and total endorsement," and then in all caps, MAGA with 3 exclamation points. So that was Donald Trump's, I would say, full-throated endorsement of Speaker Johnson. I know Elon Musk came back later and said something like totally agree to that extent. What are your thoughts? That this does not mean it's over. Not by any means. Mathematically, it is a very, very tight race. The idea here is get him in there because, again, and Matt Gaetz actually said it, and in full disclosure, I'm not the biggest Matt Gaetz fan, but he declares resistance is now futile after Trump endorsed Mike Johnson. He said that and he went to talk about when he toppled McCarthy, and he suggested that they wouldn't have done this if it meant the certification of the election. They wouldn't have went after McCarthy. Trump endorsed Johnson is the art of the deal level practicality. We could never have held up McCarthy 2 years ago for concessions if a Trump certification hung in the balance. Now it does. We were able to hold up McCarthy because Republican voters weren't all that eager to see us getting back to being Biden's, well, I'm not going to use the term, which Kevin ultimately did anyway. The resistance to Speaker Johnson is now futile. But you have had numerous, specifically, I think the most vocal voice is Thomas Massie, Representative Thomas Massie from Kentucky, saying, "I respect and support President Trump, but his endorsement of Mike Johnson is going to work out about as well as his endorsement of Speaker Paul Ryan. We've seen Johnson partner with the Democrats to send money to Ukraine, authorize spying on Americans, and blow the budget." Now, Massie has butted heads with Trump for quite some time. He actually endorsed Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in the presidential primaries. So he's one vote that does not look like a possible someone that you could whip to go to Speaker Johnson. Also, Representative Victoria Spartz wrote, "I understand why President Trump is endorsing Speaker Johnson as he did Speaker Ryan, which is definitely important. However, we will need to get assurances that Speaker Johnson won't sell us out to the swamp." And that'll be interesting because if they get those assurances like last time, if you recall, that's what led to the McCarthy debacle, where too much was given away and it was too easy to, for lack of a better term, overthrow a speaker. So this is going to be a tight race. Yes, Thomas Massey saying Mike Johnson is the next Paul Ryan. He said on January 3rd, 2017, Paul Ryan was elected Speaker by every Republican except me. Ryan went on to offer a fake repeal of Obamacare, increased spending, backed the deep state, and didn't fund a wall. 2 years later, we lost the majority, and Democrats made it a living heck for Trump. He then predicted Mike Johnson is the next Paul Ryan. On January 3rd, 2025, I won't be voting for Mike Johnson. I hope my colleagues will join me because history will not give America another do-over. Boy. And then later, that's when Trump, a couple hours later, fully endorsed Speaker Johnson. This is going to be, January 3rd, for many of us, is going to be a day where we are way too glued to C-SPAN to find out what is going to happen. I don't know how you give the assurances that Representative Spartz is asking for. Again, if we fall into that trap of making it too easy to oust a speaker, that creates even more havoc. And really, I think they could only lose mathematically, one vote? Now, I don't know. Matt Gaetz had threatened to go back and vote because technically he did win. Technically, he could be sworn in and go back and vote for this. That would change the dynamic a little bit. You won't have Democrats siding with our pick this time. Maybe with Speaker Johnson, but I'm not sure. So this is going to be very interesting. When we come back, the New York Post editorial board has a quick piece on this. I just want to give you a couple takeaways from it. Your thoughts on the endorsement of Speaker Johnson by President-elect Donald Trump. Also, as I said, I know this is a hot topic that we've discussed on the program. Assemblyman Phil Palmisano released a statement, or released an article, if you will, in regards to the climate change super fund recently signed in by Governor Hochul. That $75 billion, essentially a tax on businesses and companies with fossil fuel that provide fossil fuel. It's going to be disastrous for our economy, for business climate, when we're already ranked, if not at the bottom, near the bottom in business climate. But we are going to continue our talks about Speaker Johnson, so stay with us, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and your wrap-up of 2024, as well as what you are hoping to see in the year 2025. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back to the last Frankly Speaking of 2024. Quiet this morning. Now, what's your thoughts on Speaker Johnson as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio? Well, the New York Post editorial board says Donald Trump is dead right. The GOP must back Mike Johnson for Speaker, and here's their thoughts. Number one, Johnson did a good job taking over as the least experienced speaker since 1883, and with one of the narrowest House majorities ever. He's been disciplined and steady, taking wins where he can and cutting losses where he must. And sometimes that is hard to swallow. I understand it, but when you have that slim of a majority, you can't always have the blowout that you want and the huge win that you want. Because you see, just like you see in the Democrat Party, Republicans have different Republicans. You have the moderates, you have the ones that some would argue maybe are Democrats, you have conservative, you have hardline conservative, et cetera, et cetera. But he's fought the good fight on strategic competition with China and provided key support for Israel. He also did the right thing by allowing the vote to oust Representative George Santos, even though it further narrowed the GOP majority and so inevitably made the Speaker's job even more difficult. Second, the alternative is chaos and potentially even the emergence of a Democratic speaker. And that is the big concern. Now, keep in mind, they go back and go through the whole Kevin McCarthy thing. We don't want that again. Because then, remember, this is about the certification of the election, which is coming up on January 6th. So if they vote on the third and something, think of the original speaker with Kevin McCarthy, that a few years back, that vote, how many days, how many hours did that last? But it would risk derailing what should be Congress's pro forma ratification of the Electoral College vote to install Donald Trump as our next president, since the House couldn't fulfill its role in that process if it lacks an elected speaker. Plus, if Republicans simply can't agree on a new speaker, desperate moderates might defect to put a Democrat in the job. Now think of that. Desperate, they'll ones that don't like Trump, or perhaps, sadly, whatever you think of this, just want to get home, just want to call it a day, don't want to keep having to do their job of voting. And so eventually say, okay, what kind of deals can you work out with me, Hakeem Jeffries? What kind of votes will you support me on if I go with you? It's a scary thought, but I think anybody who's been paying attention to government for long enough and politics for long enough know there are a lot of Republicans that are quick to sell out. I don't think I'm telling tales out of school. I think Republicans have a history of that. So there's that real concern that they could defect and go to Hakeem Jeffries, which would be the most likely choice. Because remember, Democrats are going to vote for their person each and every time. Because they get, they can vote for who they want, and they're going to vote for their Democrat every time. So you've got those numbers, because it is a slim majority. You've got those numbers, and it's a scary position where think about that. If we have this historic, as Trump's term, landslide election where Republicans keep the House, we win the Senate, and we get the White House, not just by the Electoral College vote, which is the only thing that matters, but also just for icing on the cake, the popular vote. If we end up having a Democrat Speaker of the House, think of how disgraceful that is. Think of what the American voter would think of that. And that you would say, well, in 2 years, a lot of those Republicans will get booted out. 2 years is a long time. Memories are short, but I'll continue. With just 219 GOP votes to Democrats' 215, Johnson's going to need the support of almost every Republican member, including most of the eccentrics who joined in ousting McCarthy. So Trump's support is key. The disgruntled crew mainly claim to be loyal to him. The new president is coming into office with an ambitious and urgent agenda. As Trump himself says, common sense dictates retaining Johnson as Speaker. So listen up, Republicans. You can showboat, grandstand, barn burn, stem wind, and sink Johnson. Or you can join the fight for sanity on the border, the economy, DEI, etc., and vote him in. The choice is yours. We hope for the country's sake you make the right one. Well, you're always going to have a few showboaters. You're always going to have a few people that want to be the fly in the ointment, the contrarian, that know better. And this is a very Republican thing too. Know better than everybody else in that room. And I felt that way, in all honesty, about Matt Gaetz when he was ousting McCarthy, that there's always these Republicans that know better than everybody else, to the chagrin of not just the president in this case, but for the country. Because as that piece says, President Trump has a very ambitious agenda. And we can't have this infighting to where we could ultimately end up with a Democrat Speaker of the House, or let's say that's not even the case. Let's just say it's a long, drawn-out battle. Don't we want to make sure that the election is certified in a timely manner, which is January 6th? I think these are all fair questions. So again, feel free to disagree with me. I know there's a lot of people out there that aren't big fans of Mike Johnson. I know there's also people that kind of see the, pragmatic, to see the kind of like Trump said, the common sense dictates that Speaker Johnson be put in. And again, I understand Paul Ryan, and trust me, I'm on that same page. Paul Ryan left a horrible taste in everybody's mouth. He did everything he could to hamstring then President Trump. Totally understand. But Speaker Johnson isn't Paul Ryan. Speaker Johnson went around and campaigned with Trump. He was at that UFC fight with Trump after the election. He went on the weekend shows and other shows, but the Sunday shows, and had to really just take the punches, if you will, from the supposed journalists, from the anchors, and did it great. So yes, there's times when you say, just like with that continuing resolution, where you go, boy, that was maybe wrong-headed, but that's the way Washington works. And I'm not saying, how do I want to word this? I understand people say, well, that's not the way we want things. We no longer want to be the way things they've always been done. I understand that. I totally get that. But there's certain instances with such a slim majority, that he thought that we get through with this deal. It was a bad deal. I understand why people are concerned. We get through that in March, and then we start taking a look at it in March when we have the majority. I think he should have had some more conversations on this, thought this through, and saw what was happening not even behind the scenes, in front of the camera, which was how much Trump was getting accomplished with his cabinet picks and with forming Doge and the like. So I understand why there's that pushback. But that's why I'm glad personally that Donald Trump, President-elect Donald Trump, endorsed Speaker Johnson. I think we can hit the ground running in that situation if he is reelected to Speaker. But again, I would love to hear your opinion. If you agree, disagree, we could talk more about that. I'm not trying to get away from that. We'll probably talk about it a little bit in the next hour as well. But I do have a couple things I want to move on to. And we can't skip over the New York State issues. They're just too important. And I know it's an exciting time as we near the election certification and also Inauguration Day, that there are a lot of exciting national news, but we have to focus a little bit on New York State this morning as well. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking after this. The Frankly Speaking roof cam, brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact Boss Security for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio. Got some comments coming in this morning about the speaker. How about this? First comment. Our country needs to keep the current speaker for the next 2 critical years. There is too much to fix to gum up the works right now. Couldn't agree more. I agree changing the speaker could cripple our efforts. Johnson has showed his loyalty to Trump on the campaign trail. Yes, and beyond. I mean, I agree with your statement there. I think he's shown his loyalty. I think, I understand Paul Ryan. I mean, don't get me started on Paul Ryan, but Speaker Johnson is not Paul Ryan. And I think it's disingenuous for Massey and others to say that. I think it's trying to scare some Republicans, but Speaker Johnson is not that. For having the least experience of a speaker since, 1883, he has done amazing things with such a slim majority. So I would agree with your statement. Comment from a different viewer. My impression of President Trump's management style is to bring in the best people available for specific jobs, give them near complete autonomy, and trust them to present a path to success and, once approved, to carry it out. That being said, he will move people in, out, or around once their capabilities are determined and or results achieved. I would also add, if it's not working, like you said, not add because you mentioned it, out. That was something that he highlighted, but the media would say, oh, he can't keep anybody. No, you got to have the best people around you, people that you can trust. And that's why when they keep saying about the cabinet, he wants people that are loyal. Of course he wants people that are loyal. Of course he wants people that are going to further the agenda that won an overwhelming landslide on November 5th. So this idea that he doesn't want people around him to be loyal is nonsensical. But back to this viewer's comment. If you have noticed, he will glad hand affected persons, not alienate them, to get effective buy-in. But chips fall where they fall once decisions are made. We the people need to do the same thing with 47, meaning Trump. Trust him to direct the America First agenda and tune out the divisive rhetoric wherever it comes from. There are so many out there that escalate perceived microaggressions as actual harm. We should forget about leaving a better planet for our people and focus on leaving better people for our planet. Oh, that's a nice line. That will actually tie in with what we have to talk about with New York State here in a little bit, but I can see, and it's going to be getting tougher and tougher, but we are going to bring it up. One quick update from yesterday. This came in yesterday afternoon. President-elect Donald Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, remember they call her, what was it, the Ice Maiden? She sent a message Sunday ordering nominees to refrain from any posting on social media as Senate confirmation hearings near. They actually start next week. Yes, it's going to be good. There are going to be some good Frankly Speaking, is what I'm trying to say, these next couple of weeks. Quote, while the instruction has been delivered previously, I am reiterating that no member of the incoming administration or transition speaks for the United States or the president-elect himself. Accordingly, all intended nominees should refrain from any public social media posts without prior approval of the incoming White House counsel. She's no nonsense, huh? She appreciates how enthusiastic everyone is about joining the second Trump term in her otherwise frank directive. Basically saying it's my way or the highway right now. And she was so instrumental in Trump's election, and I understand for many years. She's not going to take it. Now, Trump's nominees have been silent ahead of what is expected to be a fraught process for some of the GOP-controlled Senate. If Democrats band together against any nominee's confirmation, Republicans can't afford to lose any more than 3 votes from their own conference. The Wiles memo, according to a Trump transition source, is not in response. It is not in response, and this is how the media is trying to present it, but it is not in response to the recent social media uproar caused by the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, chairs Musk and Ramaswamy over the H-1B visas that had the MAGA world spinning. Quote, it was a reminder of the guidance to intended nominees as confirmation hearings get underway next week. Yeah, I think it's a smart move. There's no need to get this infighting or get them thrown off track. Don't say anything as you're just about to cross the finish line, potentially, that could hurt in the long run. Now, do we want to? Yeah, I think I'm going to jump ahead here because I do want to start talking about New York. And, boy, we have a lot to talk about today. Let me see. How am I doing on time? All right, we do have to take a short break, and we're going to talk about New York when we come back. I wanted to mention this because, not that this was a good deed, but the old saying, no good deed goes unpunished. Well, we know that Joe Biden had an amazing amount of gumption when 37 out of 40, I think it was, death row inmates were given that clemency to have life in prison without parole. There was a lot of anger over that, because especially when you start to look at what these people did, these men did, these 37, that taxpayers will be paying for them in prison the rest of their lives. They get to live the lives that many of their victims did not. Well, one of the men that was given that clemency, who is a cold-blooded killer, is now demanding that Biden set him completely free. Because you know why? Prison is just too awful. Brandon Council, who's 38, who killed 2 mothers working at a bank, filed a motion Friday claiming the Indiana federal prison where he is staying is one of the worst in the world, and that his solitary confinement has been tantamount to illegal torture. The convicted double murderer said he has endured, quote, severe, unnecessary, and unjustifiable psychological harm, and that he deserves, quote, compassionate relief. Well, wasn't that one of the terms? Because all of a sudden Biden, or not all of a sudden, Biden doesn't believe in the death penalty, except for those 3 that he didn't want the PR pushback on. The conditions can only be accurately construed as an act of torture, said Brandon Council. So again, the Killer Khan wrote in his motion that the conditions have violated his constitutional rights based on his claim of torture and should therefore walk free. So just a week or so ago, he was sentenced to death. He was on death row. But because of that clemency issued by President Biden, he now says, well, if I'm going to have to spend life in prison, I should just be let out. The demand came just days after Biden infamously commuted the death sentence of Council and 36 other death row inmates. The president's action reduced their sentences to life in prison instead of execution. Now, I'm not going to go into what this person did. It's despicable. But now, he's given it, I guess, the old college try. He wants to be freed. If he's not going to be executed, he should be freed for compassionate release. What's your thoughts on that? Also, I'd love to hear your thoughts, again, on the endorsement by President-elect Donald Trump of Speaker Johnson. That's been the big topic so far this morning. But when we come back, we're going to hear about the Climate Change Superfund Act, and specifically Assemblyman Phil Palmisano releasing, I guess you would call it an op-ed. We're going to get to that. And the New York Post actually releasing an op-ed as well. So New York State issues. When we come back, stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security and Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back as we broadcast live from the Hesselson's studio. Okay, do you remember last time Assemblyman Phil Palmisano was on? I want to start with this. We've been talking about the Climate Change Superfund Act. Before Governor Hochul signed the $75 billion act into law, it was back in April that Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie said, I've never in my life seen corporations choose the ratepayer over the stockholder. Asking these companies to pay more, it's going to be, of course, taken out on the ratepayer. Well, he changed his tune, let it go up to a vote. Of course, it passed in Radical Albany, and it was signed into law just days ago by Governor Hochul. $75 billion, a tax, a punishment, a fine on businesses that provided fossil fuels to New York State. So Phil Palmisano, Assemblyman Palmisano from the 132nd Assembly District, friend of Frankly Speaking, released a statement on this and released really an op-ed. He said, New York currently leads the nation in out-migration. It is well known that New York is hostile to business and has one of the highest tax burdens and worst business climates in the country. This also sends a terrible message to the business community. The last thing we should be doing is making it harder for businesses to stay here, operate here, and locate here. Unfortunately, it appears Governor Hochul lacks the will to stand up to radical progressives in the legislature to prevent it. What the law does is punish businesses retroactively that had followed the rules, regulations, and laws with proper permits that we all have benefited from, businesses, manufacturers, families, farmers, etc. We are now empowering the very agency, the Department of Environmental Conservation, that approved these permits for operation to penalize, assess, and fine these businesses. This is clearly an anti-business, anti-consumer law. And to Assemblyman Phil Palmisano's point, think about that. You had to go through the red tape, the bureaucracy to get these permits to operate your business. You do it in the rightful way through the Department of Environmental Conservation. And then years later, they can come back to you and say, nah, we don't like the way you did it. I know we approved it. We don't like it anymore. We want to fine you. Now, what does that say to other businesses considering coming to New York? What does that say to businesses that are already in New York that are fearful that they'll be fined or just because of some whim, some new issue of the day, some new virtue signaling law that you could be fined? Or if your business here, your family here in New York saying, this is going to be just like Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie said back before he allowed it to come up to a vote, that I've never in my life seen corporations choose the ratepayer over the stockholder. Asking these companies to pay more, it's going to be, of course, taken out on the ratepayer. So you're going to be paying more, business is going to be paying more. Why would, as Assemblyman Palmisano said, it's anti-business, anti-consumer law. Why would businesses come here, stay here? Continuing, this bill will penalize businesses $3 billion per year over 25 years for a total of $75 billion. The reality is these businesses will need to increase costs on consumers in order to comply with the fees that they will have to pay. This will result in higher costs to heat your home, power your buildings and operations, and put gas into your vehicle. This at a time when we have an affordability crisis in New York State. There are various parts of this law that on the surface seem like they possibly are unconstitutional, including potential violations of the Taking Clause, Due Process Clause, Ex Post Facto Clause, and the Commerce Clause. I'm sure it'll be challenged in court, and I'm confident our justice system will take great care to closely examine the law's language and make an informed ruling. But the cost on that to taxpayers as well. Finally, Palmisano said, this is all part of the radical energy climate agenda being advanced in New York that is aimed at dismantling New York's affordable and reliable natural gas infrastructure. Supply and delivery systems, it's designed to take away consumer choice on how New Yorkers heat their homes, cook their food, power their buildings, and the vehicles they drive. Its costs will be borne by New York families and businesses and will jeopardize the reliability of the grid, leading to dangerous blackouts. It will continue to contribute to our nation's leading out-migration of families, farmers, small businesses, and manufacturers. Concluded, Assemblyman Phil Palmisano. So thank you to Phil for passing that along. He has been very outspoken on this. We talked to him last time on the program and focused extensively on this. I know it's gotten a lot of people worked up, and rightfully so, about the business climate, but also just the living climate in New York State and the costs. And that's what Peter Murphy at the New York Post had to say. Do I have time? Governor Hochul last week signed a new climate bill forcing fossil fuel companies to pay $75 billion in recovery assessments. You know that. It's time for large polluters to pay their fair share, she said. But the claim is an unscientific joke, and the law, passed by some of the nation's most obtuse and know-nothing legislators, means the political class in Albany just hit the gas pedal on the Empire State's economic demise. Under this new law, and we don't need to go through all that because we've talked about it over and over, but it's a colossal money grab based on junk science, so arbitrary that court challenges are certain. Perhaps the discovery process will provide the opportunity to discredit this extreme weather canard once and for all. The law will supposedly mitigate storm damage and pollution, yet no reputable scientist not feeding at the UN or government government trial would claim such absurdities. Carbon dioxide emissions simply do not cause extreme weather. Extreme weather has affected New Yorkers lately. Superstorm Sandy, not a hurricane, a dozen years ago in 2012. An ordinary lake effect snowfall of several feet in Buffalo. But it goes on, and he talks about natural disasters, et cetera, et cetera. But New York politicians also for years have refused to access the state's abundant natural gas through hydrofracking, or fracking as we know it, as adjacent Pennsylvania and other states do. Those plentiful interstate deliveries mean the political class has been living in a fantasy world, pretending to lead the nation in addressing the climate crisis without suffering power outages and other ill effects. But their coming $75 billion climate slush fund takes such virtue signaling to new extremes, imposing costs on New York residents and employers that won't easily be offset from elsewhere. Among the ripple effects will be further exodus of people, investment in jobs to saner states. The resulting fiscal and economic harms to New Yorkers matter not at all to Governor Hochul. Her ongoing weakness had made her the worst governor in New York's modern history. All right, so that was on a topic. I know we'll get back to Speaker Johnson. We can talk about that. We can talk about the incoming Trump administration. We've got a couple things here about Jimmy Carter's funeral, if we get a chance for that. There's some other issues. The media, like always, on that. But do I have time? Yes, I do. I'm going to go with this. Just to end our discussion with New York issues, Senator Tom O'Mara, our state senator, said in the earliest days of the upcoming 2025 legislative session, the spotlight will be squarely on Governor Hochul while she begins setting the stage for a new year in state government, beginning with her State of the State message to the legislature on January 14th and continuing with the unveiling of her state budget. It will be up to Hochul to show what direction she intends to lead the state through in the coming year. Many of us hope it will be a redirection of priorities and resources to begin truly addressing unmet challenges and crises, as well as charting a course for a saner, more sensible, and more sustainable state government. This is what he hopes, State Senator Tom O'Mara hopes the governor will deliver her commitment to. Number one, a safer and better quality of life for all New Yorkers by making fighting crime, supporting law enforcement and crime victims, and restoring public safety and security as one of the state's highest priorities, or responsibilities, I should say. Finally, addressing an illegal migrant crisis that has already cost state taxpayers billions of dollars and continues to place an extreme and unfair burden on local government programs and services, threatens safety and security in far too many communities, and heightens the already widespread belief that New York is a state in free fall and decline. Next, making New York more affordable by cutting the state's highest in the nation tax burden and one of the country's heaviest burdens of mandates and debt. Next, refusing the continuation of the out-of-control government spending that has defined her tenure so far and that many fear will make the nation's highest population losses even worse. Next, rethinking and slowing down a process to quickly implement radical energy mandates that ignore affordability, reliability, and sustainability. Truly transforming the state-local partnership by making good on a promise made by her predecessor over a decade ago to address the outrageous practice of unfunded state mandates. Next, recognizing the passing the buck of the state's failure to address the unemployment insurance crisis to small business owners and other employers is wrong and continues to prevent a full and robust post-COVID recovery of the state and local economies. Next, refusing to take any actions that add to the burden or otherwise jeopardize the future of New York's family farms. Finally, fully and honestly engaging a reassessment of New York's COVID response, including its tragic failures and shortcomings, especially with the state's nursing homes. Combating an exploding fentanyl crisis is next. And finally, restoring accountability to state government in the aftermath of disgraced ex-governor Andrew Cuomo's rampant abuses of executive power. So thank you. Well, and he ends by saying, we'll find out if she does head in that direction. I think we all have our doubts, but I thank you, Senator Tom O'Mara, for that piece. And hopefully we do see a redirection in Albany, as we talk so often on this program about New York State. And I think why I know we're all concerned that Senator O'Mara may not be right. I think he's hoping, like we're hoping. He's not wrong. We all want what he wants, but by signing that Climate Change Superfund Act, I don't think it signals to many of us and I'm sure Senator O'Meara, not to put words in his mouth, would agree, it doesn't give us high hopes that it's going to be a redirection in Albany. But it's a new year, 2025. You never know. It's a fresh start. So thank you, Senator Tom O'Meara. Couldn't agree more with his piece. We're going to take a short break. And then hour number 2 of Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox. Stay with us. Hour number 2 of Frankly Speaking. Broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. I'm your host, Frank Acom. I'm so glad that you've joined us this morning. Feel free to weigh in on all the topics we've discussed so far this morning. We have one comment. Holcomb needs to go now. Well, yes, we were talking about New York State issues. If you are just joining us, we were talking about the Climate Change Superfund, Senator Tom O'Meara's wish list about the upcoming State of the State and the budget, hoping that Governor Hochul kind of rights the ship. But the Climate Change Superfund has us worried in that degree. Also, we've been talking about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Speaker Johnson's endorsement by President-elect Donald Trump. An important move to hopefully unify the Republican Party to support a speaker so that the election can be certified in a timely fashion, and then of course, Trump can hit the ground running on January 20th with his agenda. I think Mike Johnson, though, you could argue, and I would love to hear your argument, you could argue that continuing resolution was a bad decision. I think he has proven, as one viewer said, he has proven his loyalty to Trump during the campaign and during the support, really the whole time after and even in the middle with the UFC fights. So your thoughts on that? Now, there does seem to be holdouts with Thomas Massie. If you are just joining us, that's kind of the breaking news story. And I guess everybody likes talking about in the news media that they're telling the Iron, what is the Iron Maiden? Is that what they keep? No, the Ice Maiden keeps telling that the nominees, no more social media for the time being. But we could talk about all of that and much more as we have been all morning long. Your thoughts on Trump endorsing Mike Johnson if you are just joining us. Speaker Johnson is a good, hardworking, religious man. The incoming president posted, he will do the right thing and he will continue to win. Mike has my complete and total endorsement. And then MAGA. So your thoughts on Speaker Johnson. Will he cross the finish line? I know Elon Musk later endorsing him as well, but you do have about 2 holdouts that keep interviewing, and this is one of the reasons why I think they like to be a holdout as well, because they're getting all the media attention, they're getting the interviews. That's not to say Thomas Massie is like a Chris Christie or something that badmouths Republicans to get the attention. This is one where he wants to, and in a way he's badmouthing, but he supports Trump, he says, but doesn't like Speaker Johnson. So he gets a lot of attention. The other representative does as well. Name escapes me right this second. Gets the attention, and it's kind of fun for a little bit, is their thought. I think it's going to be destructive for the incoming president if there's any delay. It's not going to be the end of his presidency or something, but it's going to show what kind of mess that in the media's mind is what kind of mess is yet to come. But heaven forbid if they keep this fighting going and some more moderate Republicans make the decision to side with Democrats, and you do get a Hakeem Jeffries in there as Speaker after winning in a landslide victory the White House, the House, and the Senate. I mean, that's why the posturing and the grandstanding is fine right now. But on January 3rd, as we all watch C-SPAN, I hope it goes away very, very quickly. But that's my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts. That was a breaking story later yesterday, and we had to bring it to you. Also breaking is this new, I don't know if you'd call it a poll, this new study from the Intersection finds that America now has more Republicans than Democrats. And this is unusual by historic standards. There were lots more Republicans than Democrats in the electorate. After the exit polls were reweighed to reflect the final popular vote results, Republicans outnumbered Democrats by 5 points in the AP VoteCast survey and by 4 points in the network exit polls. Historically, this is practically unheard of. Democrats have held a long-standing advantage in party identification that dates back to the New Deal, with Republicans drawing even on only a couple of occasions. The 1994 Republican Revolution and the immediate post-9/11 period. Until Ronald Reagan remade the Republican Party's image in the 80s, Democrats held a massive advantage in party ID that often reached 2-1 in the 60s and 70s. Only after Reagan's '84 landslide did the modern narrow Democrat advantage take hold. So that's interesting. I'm not going to put up all the polls because it shows it from 39 to 2009. But historically, this is very unlikely in years past. But this, I think, speaks to the message that some Democrats are saying now, that they've lost the working class, they've lost the important message to people as they're focusing on things like woke policies, DEI, things that don't put food on your table, that are really essentially calling you bad people the whole time, and calling people that may say, hey, Trump's ideas aren't really Republican or Democrat. I mean, you got Democrats on with him, like Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So maybe it's more about making America great than it is about an R or D, while you had Democrats focusing on many other issues. And I think, it takes away, people start to say, I just want to put food on my table. And when you're laughing at me for not being able to afford my bills because of some statistic you found in a government book put out by bureaucrats, it's not helping matters. So I think to those that are actually doing soul searching in the Democrat Party who say that they've lost the message and lost the working class voters, I think this poll would prove it, that it's no longer a given that there'll be a majority of Democrats in the United States. So interesting poll coming out there. America now has more Republicans than Democrats. Okay. This is a story, and there's not the specifics on it yet about who this was supposed to benefit, but I think it goes back to, remember, Politico had that opinion piece probably 2 weeks ago now, where it was stated by the writer of the op-ed that we need the bureaucrats, the people behind the scenes, to put in mechanisms to keep Trump down, essentially. So verifying the fact of what has been said numerous times by Trump himself, that there is some type of swamp, there is some type of deep state. And the Politico piece came right out and said it. You who have never been voted on, we don't know who you are, we don't know your name, we don't know your face. You can affect how the president succeeds or doesn't succeed. You can throw a monkey wrench in this position, and that goes to show you how much power bureaucrats have, by the way. But this is an example, another example to confirm what President-elect Trump, and while president too, Trump had been saying. 3 senior Justice Department officials violated internal policies and engaged in, quote, misconduct when they leaked details about a non-public investigation to the media, and I quote, days before an election. The DOJ's Office of the Inspector General, which has been run by Michael Horowitz since 2012, launched a probe after it received a complaint alleging that a politically motivated disclosure related to information about ongoing matters was made in the run-up to an unspecified election. This gets into really wonky political speak, so we won't get into that, about who can speak to the press, and there's a whole bunch of rules here. But the OIG investigation found that one of these 3 then senior DOJ officials violated the confidentiality and media contacts policy and DOJ's social media policy by reposting through a DOJ social media account links to the news article. The 3 officials were no longer DOJ employees when the investigation began and declined or did not respond to interview requests, which does not have, according to the OIG, which does not have the authority to compel testimony from former employees. So whatever this boils down to, who it was involved, et cetera, you continue to see these types of leaks, this type of information being given to the media in hopes of hurting. It goes back to, the Supreme Court, when that was released in hopes to change or help the justices change their mind on the overturning of Roe v. Wade. So this goes back to this idea of the nameless, faceless bureaucrats having way too much say, having way too much power. Okay, I do want to... today's the kind of morning that we've been having where there's just so much to cover that we're jumping around, and there's no real way to segue. But I do want to hear your thoughts on the endorsement of Speaker Johnson by President Trump. Do you think, whether or not you like Speaker Johnson, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Will he get it? Will he end up being the speaker? Does that endorsement put him over the edge? Now, Thomas Massie, who's one of the holdouts, he endorsed Ron DeSantis in the primary, so he's not what you'd call a full-throated, if you will, Trump supporter. So that may not be enough to push him over the edge and vote for Speaker Johnson. But there's others that maybe that endorsement convinces them, okay, If Trump trusts him, now you do have the people that are saying, well, he also trusted Paul Ryan, and that's the go-to. Paul Ryan is different. That you can't compare Speaker Johnson to Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan was an old holdout of, well, look, he was Mitt Romney's running mate. He was the moderate Republicans that ultimately led to Trump's victory in a way. Keeping in mind, Paul Ryan, when he ran for VP with Mitt Romney, didn't even win his own state. Keep that in mind. But that's when you start to see that popularity, and you've heard me call it the Romney effect numerous times, where that was another example where we were told, we need someone like Mitt Romney. He's the only way we can beat Barack Obama. And then we saw that disastrous campaign, and then I think that's when Republicans were finally enough is enough. It was actually the straw that broke the camel's back is when they told us it was Jeb Bush. It was the only way they could defeat Hillary. And that's when people said, no, you told us that about Romney, you told us that about McCain. So enough is enough. So it was people like Paul Ryan that led people to say, all right, you know what, we're going to give this guy a chance. The media hates him, everybody else does. In the Democrat Party, they're going after him, but we're going to give it a shot because what do we have to lose? To quote Trump on so many instances, what do we have to lose? But Thomas Massey, if you are just joining us, said on Monday that Mike Johnson is the next Paul Ryan. So that's his kind of line of attack. On January 3rd, 2017, Paul Ryan was elected Speaker by every Republican except me, he said. Ryan went on to offer a fake repeal of Obamacare, increased spending, backed the deep state, and didn't fund a wall. 2 years later, we lost a majority, and Democrats made it a living heck for Trump. Mike Johnson is the next Paul Ryan. I don't agree with that. Again, Paul Ryan is an old school moderate, and Speaker Johnson is not. And think of what Speaker Johnson has accomplished, like the New York Post was highlighting. Think of what he's accomplished having the least amount of experience to have that position. So I know we keep talking about it, but it is the big issue of the day. Also, we learned about Biden is closing the government as a mark of respect for the late former President Jimmy Carter. We're going to be talking about Jimmy Carter here in just a little bit. Biden is getting some pushback, mostly from conservatives, of course, but for his jab at Trump after his speech on Jimmy Carter's decency. Very inappropriate time. We talked about it yesterday. There's a little bit about that. And if we get an opportunity, there is some updates on the media and those that have not learned their lesson. And also a couple things to be concerned about as we near Trump's time in office, meaning how the media is going to handle it. You're already starting to see people coming out and saying Elon Musk is a threat to national security just being there. So we'll talk about that as well. But stay with us. And if you want to talk more about the Climate Change Superfund here in New York, love to hear from it. All right, we'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact Boss Security today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio. We've been covering a lot this morning on our last Frankly Speaking of the year 2024. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on the upcoming year or in the past year, in 2024. We have a comment from a viewer. We're talking about the Climate Change Superfund, which sounds about as scary as it actually is. The Climate Change Superfund, $75 billion, basically a fine on these businesses with fossil fuels. But keep in mind, before I read this viewer's comment, and I think this is an important point to stress, and that's why I'm so glad Phil Palmisano, Assemblyman Palmisano, did stress this, that imagine if you're a business, and it doesn't matter what you're making, because it could be whatever the virtue signaling issue is of the day, and you've been doing everything. You went and got your proper permits from the state, from the DEC, et cetera, et cetera. You got all the permits you were supposed to do. And then 10 years later, those same groups are saying, we don't like that now. We're going to fine you $3 billion a year for 25 years. A $75 billion essentially penalty overall for these businesses that they choose for doing what they were told they could do. So now what do you think if you're a business, and let's say it's not about global warming next time. Let's say it's about, I don't know what, an air filter or some widget that you make. And you say, wait a minute, this is no longer popular and I'm going to be fined for doing what I was told I could do. So it keeps businesses out of New York. And remember, our business climate in New York, unfortunately, is very low, if not the lowest. There's a mass exodus of people. And to this viewer's point, and I'll read the comment, and I think it's a very good comment, think of what it does for the consumer. Because if you remember, Carl Hastie, the Assembly Speaker, said, the Assembly Leader, said before this went up for a vote. He wasn't going to put it forward with a vote. And he said, I've never seen a scenario, and I'm paraphrasing, never seen a scenario where this doesn't go to the ratepayers. The companies aren't going to pay for it. It's going to go to the consumers. But yeah, he let it go up for a vote anyway, and Governor Hochul just signed it into law a few days ago. So this is what a viewer had to say. Regarding Hochul's idiocy, not only will it become more expensive to live in New York State, but for those of us who want to get out of this state, it will be impossible to sell our homes, since nobody in their right mind would want to move here. That's a very good point. You think about it's going to cost on the gas, to again paraphrase the assemblyman, I suppose. It's going to cost on the gas you put in your car. It's going to heat your homes to survive. Think about farmers. It'll affect us all across the board at a time when there is a real issue with cost of living in this state and throughout the country. We talked about inflation, et cetera. So you add, we've all had the conversation about our gas bills, right? That's a pretty common talk in the community, just in chatter with your friends and your family. Now imagine what that'll look like with this fine being put on to the consumer in one way or another. But I do think you raise a good point. If someone's thinking, not just businesses are saying, I'm not going to move here because of these issues, being fined for something I did 10 years ago when I was doing it right, but also, so business not want to come here, but what about the people, to this viewer's point, what about the people who will say, well, New York State's beautiful, especially upstate New York, but I can't afford to live there, just like the person trying to sell their home, so no one in their right mind would want to buy their home. That's a very good point. Thank you very much. Biden is going to close the government as a mark of respect for late former President Jimmy Carter, which is kind of interesting at coming off the back of all the talks of the government shutdown. But following the death of former President Jimmy Carter, President Biden will shut down, closing all executive departments and agencies of the federal government on January the 9th. The closures, which Biden described as a mark of respect for the 39th president, will be in effect on the day of the late former president's funeral. Carter will lie in state, we mentioned this yesterday on the program, in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol, and his funeral will take place at Washington National Cathedral. Biden signed a proclamation on Sunday declaring January 9th as a national day of mourning and ordering all American flags to fly at half-staff for the next 30 days. We're going to talk about that in a moment. I found this because, well, we'll tell you about it in a moment why that matters, about the flags being flown at half-staff for 30 days. To some people, why it matters. I think it's a touching tribute. I think you may have noticed them around town, but there's more to dive into it. No, I can't. Nope. So there's something else kind of interesting about this. Well, let me take a short break. Someone trying to get in the door. There's a interesting kind of historical piece, and I don't know how this happened. But from the grave, former Vice President Walter Mondale is going to present his eulogy. And you say, what? It's not a hologram. It's not something like that. We'll tell you about it when we come back, and I'm going to keep you hooked. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox. Stay with us. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. So I do find this very interesting. So even though Mr. Mondale passed away first, that's former Vice President Walter Mondale, in 2021, he left behind the eulogy he planned to deliver for Jimmy Carter, which will now be read at Mr. Carter's memorial service at Washington National Cathedral on January 9th by his son, Ted Mondale. Also, former President Gerald R. Ford, who died in 2006, likewise left a eulogy that will be read by his son, Stephen Ford. I don't know if this is typical, if you've heard of this in the past. I mean, are presidents writing eulogies for people now? That's very interesting. And I'm not going to go through the history of that. I think it's a really touching. I think it'll be something to watch for, but I just found that a little tidbit interesting. So Biden has been ripped lately by mostly conservatives, but for taking that slam at Trump after talking about Jimmy Carter's death, having really the audacity is what people are saying to say decency. That's the difference between Carter and Trump. Decency. Can you imagine Jimmy Carter walking by someone who needed something and just keep walking? I don't know what that's in reference to. Can you imagine Jimmy Carter referring to someone by the way they look or the way they walk? or the way they talk, excuse me. The political remark did not sit well with many, ironically doing it with the term decency. I guess looking at the passing of Jimmy Carter as a quote-unquote opportunity to rip into Trump, the unmitigated gall of the corrupt Biden lecturing Americans on decency off of Jimmy Carter's death, said Jorge Benilo. Hugh Hewitt said, is it decent to have deceived the American public for years about your condition and to do so via a complicit and complacent legacy media? The greatest cover-up in modern American political history and the greatest media scandal as well is still unacknowledged on the record by anyone around President Biden and by almost all legacy media figures. Their sunk costs are enormous, but they won't cut them loose and own the cover-up of their complicity. Jonathan Turley, who we quote quite frequently on this program, he's a legal analyst. He pointed out that Carter, unlike Biden, did not pardon a family member embroiled in a corruption scandal. Even though, if you recall, at the time there was an issue with Billy Carter of Billy Beer fame. Billy Carter taking a loan from Libya. He did not pardon Billy. Quote, instead of showing Carter's honesty, Biden lied for years and then pardoned his own son after repeatedly denying he would never do so during the campaign. He pardoned his son for any crimes committed over a 10-year period, including potential crimes that many believed implicated the president himself in the multi-million-dollar influencing peddling operation. It was a very odd time, kind of one of those scenarios where he didn't read the room, as it said. Tammy Bruce, who's a Fox News contributor, called Biden a jerk for this, saying, look, it's a shame. It's embarrassing for Joe Biden. He had that gritted teeth thing that he does. I've seen before on this program and other places. And we know for 50 years, Joe Biden has been a jerk. So perhaps he should take some of his own advice with what's happened to this country. It was an opportunity, as President Trump, I think, illustrated, to be generous, right? Be generous. American people have made their decision. We're all Americans. We're moving forward. We will disagree politically and philosophically, but it's just a remarkable and a shameful thing to watch. But it is classic Biden. This is what we've been seeing, and it's partly what the American people don't like. You might not agree with Trump's style, but Biden is presented as being as a unifier and the nice guy, Scranton Joe. And he's mean and he's a bully, and it's a shame, it's embarrassing, and it's unfortunate. Yeah, I mean, when you talk about decency, who showed decency after the passing of Jimmy Carter? That I thought that was a very nice statement released by President-elect Donald Trump. A really touching tribute in a way, very level-headed, nothing about, what kind of president he was really and anything like that. And then, yet Biden suggesting that it was Trump showing no decency as he attacks Trump. And I don't even know what that is in reference to. Could you imagine Jimmy Carter walking by someone who needed something and just keep walking? Is that something that Donald Trump is known for? I think it's quite the opposite. And also this idea, I just don't quite understand it. And I thought it was wrong-headed at the time, and we mentioned it yesterday. But I had mentioned that we were going to talk about this. Joe Biden made the announcement that the flags will be flown at half-mast for 30 days. And now to kind of go back to the pettiness that Biden showed with that comment, there's a pettiness among those supporting the half-mast, and they see an irony in that during Trump's inauguration, the flags will be flown at half-mast. I mean, the only word I can think of is petty on this. Trump will be sworn in as the 47th president, January 20th, which is within the window of the prescribed 30-day national mourning period. It will be the first time American flags have flown at half-staff during a presidential inauguration. Since flag code is not federal law, Trump could, in theory, order flags to be raised for his inauguration. A spokesperson for the president-elect did not respond to a comment or a request for comment by the New York Post. I think there could be an argument made that they should raise them for that one day. Then President Richard Nixon ordered flags lowered to honor predecessor Lyndon B. Johnson, who passed away a few days after Nixon's second inauguration in 1973. But Nixon had them temporarily raised to full staff February 13th of that year to honor the first returning Vietnam prisoners of war. Now, as I said, those on the left went to X and now smug. That's a good way of putting it too. The New York Post calls it smug, smugly noting the anticipated lowered flags for Trump's inauguration day. Quote, Good morning and happy Monday to everyone who is saddened by the loss of the great President Jimmy Carter, but glad to know that flags must now be flown at half-staff during Felon 47's unholy inauguration. Carter is a hero even on his way out. That was one comment. And that's actually, it's this group is the one that tweeted that is, as they call it here, a paid Democrat Party shill. His real name is Majid Padelin. Another user called the flags being flown at half-staff during the inauguration some kind of poetic or prophetic justice. A third commentator said it was a huge, well, I'm not going to use that one. I guess if that gives you some comfort on Inauguration Day, by all means, I say go with it. But there's this anger out there. It's starting to boil up, and that's why I said to be concerned going into the next term of Trump. It's not going to be right now. There's been kind of a lull, not completely like with that kind of pettiness, but a little bit of a lull. But it will move forward with the attacks on Trump in the sense of lawfare, et cetera, et cetera. Did you see Don Lemon? As we've been talking about, has the media learned its lesson? Don Lemon, who I think played an important role in this election, and hear me out over this, he went up and interviewed some people who said they were struggling to put food on the table and pay for their bills. And he basically laughed and mocked and ridiculed them and would go, and this is the one that I reference so often, he'd say, but look at page, and I'm paraphrasing here, but look at page 37 of this bureaucratic manual that says that actually you're doing really well. And you're just not really smart enough to understand it. It's kind of the idea that we've been hearing with the Biden administration and the economy. You just don't get it. You're just not smart enough to understand what the actual metrics are telling us and how good you're doing. And you look at your bank account and you say, wait, didn't I used to have a savings account 4 years ago? Or, you get your bill at the grocery store. But again, Don Lemon laughing at those people, mocking and ridiculing them. And I think that did play, and it wasn't just Don Lemon, it was so many others, but I think that did play a really important role in the election. He was, I'm not even going to try to read what he said. It was a profane rant because he was trashing Trump supporters after this whole visa feud with Elon Musk, gloating about stupid MAGA brain. And that's about the cleanest thing that I can read. I don't want to, he was giddy. He was so happy. He was beaming. You have been co-opted because you're in a cult and you don't even realize it because you have stupid MAGA brain and you don't get it. How stupid and dumb are you? Very eloquent statement from Don Lemon. It should come as no surprise why he doesn't have much of a job anymore. I thought he had quit Twitter. Now is he back? I'm confused how that works. Or quit social media and then he comes back. That happens quite frequently. I'm not going to go through his history of Don Lemon, but to prove that there are some that still haven't learned with these type of attacks. But I just realized I got to take a short break. A lot of comments coming in. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be right back. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security and Horsets. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back with Frankly Speaking, broadcasting live from the Hesselsons studio. We got a couple comments coming in. Then we're going to take a look at the media. Have they learned their lessons? Some have, I think. Others, not so much. We're also going to take a look a little bit here about a few things. Trump, again, your opinion. Do you not even opinion on Speaker Johnson, unless you want to? Do you think he'll be voted in as Speaker, reelected as Speaker, on January the 3rd, making it a smooth transition to January 6th when Trump's election is to be certified? Or do you think we'll be stuck watching C-SPAN for a couple days like the McCarthy debacle? All right, comments from viewers. Government workers will still get paid regardless of government shutdown or not, won't they? Yes, in both situations. If you're speaking of when Biden is shutting down the government for a day of mourning for the loss of President Jimmy Carter, yes, of course, they'll get paid in their normal paycheck. When it comes to a government shutdown because of no continuing resolution or whatever, they don't get paid then. But when they were brought back to work, we're talking specifically the non-essential employees, which I wouldn't want that on my business card, but apparently in government it's a badge of honor. A non-essential employee, they'll get back pay. So if you're off a month, when you come back, you will get that paycheck that is that month that you did not work. So This viewer continues and is right on the money, as if they don't get enough paid time off already. Yes, that is a very good point. So get another day off in this instance on January 9th. That's not going to be every year, but this year they will have another day off, and they will be paid for that. But if you were speaking of like the continuing resolution, which we're all clear off of that, I think we are for a little while, you will get paid, but it'll be after it all clears up. Okay. Comment, I think Carter was a good person, but not so good of a president given the state of affairs in this country during that time. Yeah, I think there was a lot of comments in that direction that, and that's why, many people held off and haven't dived into his presidency and have talked about his after presidential legacy. Because you don't want to look critical. That's why Biden was so wrong-headed in that scenario, to use it as a way to attack Trump, because that's not the time. We talk about it when, heaven forbid, there's a mass shooting somewhere, and instantly you turn on the news, and instead of hearing about what happened, you have time to like process it and heal and think and grieve and all the emotions you go through. Instead of that, you turn it on to the news, a 24/7 news cycle, and it's all about banning guns or whatever. Read the room. This goes with Biden. This goes with the media. Take a breather, and like this viewer did perfectly, maybe disagree, kind of like what Trump said. Not philosophically and politically on the same page, but still a good and decent man, and did great things after his presidency. So I appreciate your point. Ken from Horseheads writes, Hochul is true to her words. She stated unequivocally that she is a Biden Democrat, which to me means that she is just a puppet for her Democrat handlers, like everyone knows Biden is. If we had a media that was true to their profession, they would be digging to uncover who the handlers are so that we can see who are actually running the state and the country. To your point, Ken, there hasn't been a lot more about that alleged Chinese agent that was working for Hochul, has there? We haven't heard a lot about that, but we know that she worked for former Governor Cuomo as well, that there was some decisions made at her request to not say certain things about China or Taiwan or et cetera. You're right. It'd be interesting because there's a lot of money to be had in green energy too. Don't think for a moment there isn't. But has the media, here's $1 million question, and you know the answer to it. Have the media learned their lesson from this landslide election? No. Princeton University professor, keep in mind as we talk about academia as well, this is a double whammy, going on MSNBC and as a Princeton University professor, just proving yet again the bias in academia and in media. Eddie Glad Jr. He said, quote, it is an important point that requires, I think, a bit of truth-telling about the Republican Party in its modern iteration. There's always been at least these three elements: corporatists, libertarian, and nativists, right? So this is a really important point, right? How many times can you say right? My goodness. In the sense that you've always had these three components, and Ronald Reagan was able to balance them in interesting sort of ways. And so we have here is the plutocrat, right? And Elon Musk, right? I'm not making this up how many times he said right, okay? I'm not mocking him or ridiculing him. This is what in radio and perhaps TV they call a crutch word. It's something that you depend on when you can't think of something else to say, and you rely on it too much. That's what we have here. This is a filler. Okay. But I'll go back. Why not? We'll start that one over again. And so we have here is this plutocrat, right? And Elon Musk, right? Greed, pulling kind of advancing his interests. And you have right-wing populism that sometimes is expressed in terms of an emphasis in the American worker, but it takes the form of xenophobia. It takes the form of nativism. Nativism. That's tough. It takes the form of hatred. Wow. So we have the collision of greed and hatred right in front of us, and that's at the heart of Trumpism, of MAGAism. It's always been greed, always been selfish, it's always been hatred, and now it's on full view. Now that's like when Biden called Trump supporters garbage, or you have bitter clingers, or go back to Governor Hochul saying that, of course, if you vote for Republican, you're anti-American and anti-women. So that's on MSNBC. Now we go back to MSNBC, but a different program. I think it's a different program. Nope, same program, Deadline. Nicole Wallace said, I think the study of MAGA is essentially to defeat MAGA, right? What is it with everybody saying right? And if you want to go to the country in 4 years with the political movement that defeats MAGA, you have to understand MAGA. And so to me, this is a story that personifies that you just can't look away, right? But the idea that one figure, and I think it's Bannon in this case, is trying to preserve something that to him, as a MAGA enforcer, is, I don't even know the vocabulary to use, precious. You know, the anti-immigration view has to be pure. To be against these visas being offered is in direct conflict with Trump's core promise, which is of a robust economy, because what Musk represents is that American businesses feel that they can prosper and thrive without access to these visas. Again, the study of MAGA, to be able to defeat MAGA, is to understand where the weak links are, and this is clearly going to be one of them. So their goal is to study MAGA to defeat MAGA. At MSNBC, we wonder why the ratings are plummeting. We also learned, since we're on Elon Musk, I don't have time, I got to take a break. We've seen the push to suggest that it's actually Elon Musk who is the president. That's what Democrats are doing because they think it's going to get under Trump's skin, and that Trump may either get rid of Elon Musk or he'll blow up and get really angry, something like that. Going back to the word of the day, petty is what it is. But they keep pushing this idea that he's really the man behind the scenes, which would have been interesting if they actually worried about people behind the scenes for the last 4 years, the puppets behind, when they were refusing the report on his Biden's mental health, but knew who was... I don't know if they knew who actually was running it the place. But so you're seeing the attacks on Elon either by praising him too much to get Trump angry or by attacking him in other ways. We're going to get to that in just a moment, but we got to take a short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security and Horseheads. Contact Boss Security today for all your business and home security needs. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Thank you so much for joining us. So the media is now going in, as I mentioned, that is President Musk, right? Now they're going in that Musk is a threat. Retired Lieutenant General Russell Honore is sounding the alarm on Elon Musk's potential security risk and his newfound role as a close advisor to Donald Trump. He took to the pages of the New York Times to explain in significant detail why he believes the leader of Doge and holder of multiple federal contracts with the United States industrial, space, and military complex may be beholden to China over massive loans he received from the foreign government in years past. I've got to say, it's interesting when they're concerned about some and not others. Also, we've got, and I don't understand this one, Laura Loomer, who... I don't know if you would use it. This is coming from Mediaite, so it's a little to the left here, to the left, I should say. But right-wing MAGA influencer. I think that's kind of a lofty title for Laura Loomer. But anyway, she has become critical of Elon Musk. I don't know if there's maybe some anger there that she wasn't picked to be in the cabinet or something. Loomer suggested, I'm not saying President Trump is bought and paid for, but he's scared to cross monarch Elon Musk. This is a problem when you allow for a billionaire to make a $200 million donation. And so maybe really we do need to have campaign finance regulations in this country. I mean, essentially, what is happening, I love President Trump. I'm not saying that President Trump is bought and paid for, but it sounds like people are scared of crossing the king of the world, Elon Musk, the monarch, okay? This is going back to the Matt Gaetz idea that I was talking about, and maybe a little bit Thomas Massie. There's some, and this is a long Republican tradition of certain Republicans knowing in their mind that they're the smartest person in the room and not realizing the damage they're doing overall to their party. They're worried about number one. They're looking out for number one, which is their brand and the attention that they're getting. I believe that's one of the reasons why I didn't care for Matt Gaetz in that pick originally, is because I believe that's what he was doing during the McCarthy debacle. And I also believe that's a little bit of what we're seeing with Thomas Massie. They like to be kingmakers, not realizing that in doing so, they're hurting their overall cause. It's the same kind of Republicans that forget about the 80-20 principle that Reagan put forward, that if we disagree 20% of the time, you're still 80% of my friend. Of course, I'm paraphrasing that, and not 100% my enemy, or 20% my enemy. You're 80% my friend. They don't look at it that way. It's got to be all or nothing, and it's impossible with such a small majority in the House unless all Republicans became in lockstep, like Democrats are very good at doing. Republicans have never been good at that. So, having said that, I just mention it because I wanted to bring up Speaker Johnson again and have your thought. But I'm not really sure what Laura Loomer is thinking in that scenario. But I would love to hear your opinion on it. All right. Do we have to take another short break? No. It turns out things aren't as bad as for Democrats as we thought. That's what Representative Jerry Connolly said Monday on CNN News Central. Now, Jerry Connolly, if that name sounds familiar, he is the one that was chosen for that leadership position over AOC. And there's been some anger there from some Democrats saying we need fresh blood, we need new people. So Jerry Connolly saying, and like I said, there's going to be some that soul search after a landslide loss like this. There's going to be others that just say, hey, let's keep going the way we've always been doing it. So he was asked about the lessons learned, this again on CNN News Central, from the election. He said, I really think we have some regrouping to do. Is that like putting certain people in leadership positions and not young people? I don't think this election was as dire as initial press reports made it. Democrats kind of held their own across the country. We had some significant losses in the Senate because of bad geography. Oh, is that what that is? We picked up one seat in the House, and we kind of held our own, mostly in state legislatures. But that doesn't mean that we can't improve and we can't learn, upon reflection, lessons from this recent election. I think how we use language is really important. I've succeeded here in Northern Virginia building a Democrat majority by taking common sense language that makes sense at the kitchen table. Progressive ideas, but not lecturing. Not elitists, not judgmental, but an invitation to join us in these policies and these programs. That works here, and I believe it can work across the country. So regrouping, kind of examining how we message and the language we use, I believe will serve us well. And being on the trenches, on the bulwark over these next 2 years will serve us well in a midterm comeback. All right, we got to take a short break, folks. Get your last-minute comments in for the year 2024. This is, of course, the last edition, obviously, of 2024. Frankly speaking, we'll be back on the 2nd. So get your last minute questions in. What do you think about the upcoming year? How are you feeling? Stay with us. We'll be right back, wrapping up the program when we come back. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam, brought to you by Boss Security and Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking, as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio. I'm your host, Frank Acom, wrapping up today's edition with a couple of quick things. Comments from viewers. Let's go to this. I'm not sure that Elon campaigned to get into politics, but rather was invited to get involved by President Trump. Yeah, as a matter of fact, if you look back at it, and this is what some concerns that people have, is that he was more of a Democrat, but then got to know some of the policies, much like Tulsi Gabbard and much like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. started to see those policies and realized that it wasn't about a D or an R for some of these positions. It is about returning America to sanity. So, I think he was almost forced to get involved in the sense of he wanted to do what was right for the country. Next up, different comment. I don't care what language a Democrat uses. A rose by any other name is still a rose. And that's in reference, and that's a good point, to Representative Connolly, suggesting that they kind of need to rebrand or get better message and use their language better. I don't know how you want to say that, for PR reasons, to kind of trick certain people. I'm not sure, but you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not about the language you use. It's about the beliefs of either party. I wanted to mention this earlier in the program, but this is a perfect way to end the program. A top Palestinian leader says he expects that President-elect Donald Trump will destroy Iran, which will cause remaining Hamas influence to crumble. Hamas has been decimated by Israel's war in the Gaza Strip, but in the West Bank, the terror group has been rising up against the Palestinian Authority, which is run by the rival Fatah party. The Palestinian Authority is supported by Western governments, including the U.S. and Hamas and other Islamic groups, accused it of cozying up to Israel. I don't want to go into all of that, but I just thought it was interesting that the Palestinian leader, I was trying to find the name, even though it's not going to go well for me, Mohammed Hamdan, Secretary General of the PA, ruling Fatah party, said, "We are confronting Hamas ideology. Our problem is with Hamas linked to the regimes outside Palestine. We see that Trump and the ruling government in Israel are planning to destroy Iran. So Hamas followers will have no choice than to become Palestinian." Interesting. Yesterday, and we mentioned this, I believe, at the beginning of the show, but maybe I didn't get a chance to get to it. Appeals Court has upheld the civil verdict against Donald Trump. Federal Appeals Court on Monday upheld a jury's finding in a civil case that Donald Trump sexually abused a columnist in an upscale department store dressing room in the mid-1990s. You know the whole story. So that was just an update at the end of the program here. Interesting piece by Lindsay Cornick at Fox News, if you have a chance. Democrats launched a calculated effort to undermine the Supreme Court ever since the Dobbs decision, and that is coming from a CBS reporter, Major Garrett, saying it really started and took off with the wave of the Dobbs decision, the court's ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade. The outrage was so extreme that you saw, I think, a quite calculated effort to undermine the legitimacy of the Supreme Court by Democrats, Senate Democrats. For example, hearings, stories about scandals, some of which were pretty overblown, to say the least. So that has an impact on public opinion. The public states, No, it was Jan Crawford, CBS News reporter Jan Crawford. I didn't mean to say Major Garrett. Yeah, but it was CBS News reporter Jan Crawford who said this. She continued, the public starts to believe this court is corrupt, and this is on the take, none of which is true. This is still a court. You may disagree with their decision. It is a very conservative court. It's not a corrupt court. There are 9 justices who have very different views on how to interpret the Constitution, who are kind of in a titanic struggle over law, not politics. All right, there we go. Oh, also, I don't know if I agree with this, but Lionel Shriver has a piece of the New York Post. Woke is dead. Let's make sure it never comes back. All right. Well, thank you, everybody who joined us this morning on this New Year's Eve edition of Frankly Speaking. I hope you have a very fun and safe New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. We'll be back live, of course, on the 2nd with plenty to talk about. But you see the number on the bottom of the screen. You can feel free to reach out at any time while I'm here or away. It's 24/7 line. Leave a voicemail or text at any time. And again, we're going to have a lot, as I mentioned, with the potential re-election of Speaker Johnson on the 3rd. So we'll have a lot to talk about there. Then we have, of course, coming up the certification of the election on the 6th, the inauguration on the 20th. Again, I asked the question, are you going to the inauguration? All that and much more. So it's going to be busy news time, and I hope that you'll join us every weekday morning, starting at 6 a.m. for Frankly Speaking, only on WYDC TV. Big Fox. Have a great New Year's, folks. Stay safe, and we will see you on the 2nd.